Back in June, I was fortunate enough to take a beautiful cinnamon-phased black bear with my recurve bow. In this video, we're going to go over some basic butchering techniques that I used on the bear and that will work on most any four-legged big game animal. Please stay tuned until the end, and we'll talk about how to get kids involved from field to table in hunting and reconnect them with the sources of their food. So we're here in Idaho bear hunting, and we've got a couple of bear hindquarters to process. Look a lot like the hindquarters you might get from a white-tailed deer. Every four-legged animal is pretty much built the same, so you take them apart the same and debone them pretty much in the same way. So the first thing we'll do is start by taking off this connective tissue. Some people call this the silver skin. And then we're going to work through here and debone all of this meat, get it into freezer bags, and get it in our freezer.
Where'd this meat come from?
This meat came from a bear hunter who is here hunting with a friend of ours. We've been here about a week and we haven't had success yet, but this guy shot a bear last night. He's from Pennsylvania, and so it's difficult for him to take the meat home, and he was gracious enough to give us these two hindquarters, and so we're going to process these and make use of them ourselves. And you can see that little bit of meat that came off when I was taking that silver skin off. Bear meat is very rich. It's pretty fatty compared to something like a deer, and really good. I know a lot of people don't eat bear. They claim they don't like it. I just think that it's either all in their head or they haven't had it prepared well, because I've eaten it many times and it's really good. We're excited to have this.
Is there a difference between a spring bear or a bear that you would harvest in fall?
Yeah, there can be a difference. Bears in the spring, in the early spring, are just coming out of hibernation. They can be a little thin, and they're first eating grass to sort of prime their stomach to get ready to eat more rich foods like carrion and other meat. They tend to be pretty good in the spring, especially later in spring. Like this is the first week of June, so bears here in Idaho should be really good eating right now. Later in the fall, they can get sort of weird depending on what they're eating. Bears that are eating a lot of fish, or if they're eating carrion, can sometimes get an off flavor. Bears that are eating berries, they love to eat, they'll spend a lot of time in berry patches, especially in mid to late summer, can be delicious. So, it really does depend on what the bear is eating. So the trick to taking off the connective tissue or the silver skin is to remove it from the meat, because if you leave it on, it makes the, and that becomes part of what you're eating and chewing, it's pretty stringy and makes the meat tough. If you're going to try to eat it, you can see that's like sinew there. I mean, it's really, I can't even poke my finger through that, so it's not something you'd want to eat. People would call that gristle maybe. You want to get that off. The trick is to get it off without losing a lot of meat, because the meat's going to want to lift up with it. And so using something like a fillet knife, or a knife that's got a flexible blade like you'd be filleting a fish with, is a good trick to get started. Now once you get all that off and you're deboning, then you can use a stiffer bladed knife like this one. Sometimes people, I think, get too worried about how they're going to debone something like a hindquarter from a deer or a bear. In fact, the quarter tells you what to do. The meat tells you what to do. So look, if I just pull with my fingers and start to cut here, you can see that all starts to come apart just like that. And so it's really, you don't need to know a tremendous amount about anatomy or butchery or anything. Same is going to happen here. I can take my finger and I can feel the bone right here. That's the femur. And I can tell that's going to separate. I can almost separate it with my finger, but I'll just take the tip of the knife, and there you can see the bone coming out right there. And so we're going to pop that right there, and then just come on through, and we'll be able to pull all of that right off the bone. And what we'll have is, you know, we'll be able to cut steaks and other pieces of usable meat out of this and not really lose anything because we're getting right down to the bone here. We can do right the same right here. You see that? And if you want, you can get roasts this way, steaks, however you want to do it. We're gonna, in a minute here, we'll cut this across this way. We're gonna lift this up and we're gonna cut this, and this is all just gonna fall away. Just like that. And then these little pieces, you might see some stuff hanging on here and say, oh, that's gonna go to waste. That won't go to waste. We'll take this and clean it up. And this is what I would call either stew meat or burger meat, or a lot of, you know, we do a lot of canned venison. So this can be used to pressure cook to can, to grind for burger, or to use as stew meat. So we don't throw that away. That just goes on a different pile. So when you butcher a bear or a deer or anything, you end up with a lot of piles. You end up with your stew meat pile, you end up with a scrap pile, you end up with a pile of roasts, and you end up with a pile of meat that you probably want to cut across the grain to turn into steaks.
How much meat do you think this will yield?
Typically with big game animals, you know, the ratio is about 40%. So let's make the math easy. If the animal's 100 pounds, you'll end up with about 30 to 40 pounds of usable meat, because the rest of it is bones, hide, skull, you know, all that other stuff that adds up to weight but is not really usable for meat. You can see 3 different muscle groups that we're going to cut apart to make into usable pieces. We've got what I call the round roast right here, and then these 2 pieces on each side. And I'm just going to, these will all get cleaned up later, but I'm just going to take that one off right now. There it is. Then we're going to take this one off. See it right here. See that separation right there? You can see how that muscle group is going to fall out of there. And we have that one, and we have this one. And this is like a little eye right here. This is what I cut up into what I call tips. And these are great to do on kebabs. So you just cut this across the grain into tips. You get small pieces of meat that you can marinate, and then put it on the grill as a kebab. You can just even do it on like a green stick and hold it right over the fire. All right, now a piece like this obviously needs a lot of cleanup. It's got some dirt on it from when it was processed in the field, and it's got a layer of fat and silver skin on it that we're going to take off with the fillet knife.
What do you think are the biggest mistakes people make when processing meat?
Not taking the silver skin off is huge. You have to do that. I think that people don't get the meat cooled down quickly enough. Really important to get the meat cooled down. I think that people don't let it, there's a lot to talk about with aging meat, and a lot of people have, you know, varying opinions on it. You don't have to age meat a long time, but you do need to at least allow it to go through rigor mortis, so the muscles set up and get tense and then relax again. If you try to butcher during that period when it's in rigor mortis, it's going to be hard to butcher, and you're not going to have good meat. You want to let everything relax a little bit. Usually takes a few days. But during those few days, you can't leave your deer or bear hang in 75-degree weather. So if that's all you have to work with, break it down into pieces like this and get it in the refrigerator for a few days before you freeze it. It's really important.
What about leaving the bone in? Is that something that people tend to do that you should or shouldn't do?
Yeah, I mean, some people do that. If you take, you know, I keep referring to deer because that's what most people have experience with, and it's what I have experience with too. I'll show you something real quick. Here's a piece where I did a good job and a bad job. So you can see how that piece of silver skin came off of there nice and clean right here. but I sort of messed up a little bit here, and I ended up with a piece of meat clinging to it. And it doesn't mean that has to be wasted. I hate to waste meat. So what you can do is just sort of lay that down, if you can see that, and just run your knife like this right through there, and now that goes on your stew meat pile. And even this, you know, will still need some cleanup, but it's looking good. And then we'll just get rid of that. Oh, you asked me about leaving the bone in and not deboning it. You can do that. A lot of commercial butcher shops, if you take your deer or bear to be processed by a processor, by a commercial butcher, sometimes they're used to doing, you know, domestic animals like cattle, and they'll clean it up and then cut it across the bone into steaks. And I've had some meat like that that's good, but often I don't think it's great because it smears the bone marrow and other tissues across the meat, and it doesn't get cleaned up very well. And I don't know, I feel like if you're going to be a home butcher, the way to do it is to debone it.
Can you do anything with the bones? Does it make does bear bone make good stock?
You know, I don't know if bare bones make good stock or not. It's not something I've ever done. I would imagine it does, but in general, yeah, you can put the bones in the oven and bake them a little bit, and then boil them off to make bone broth.
What about the fat of a bear? Is there anything you can do with that?
Yeah, rendered bear fat is, you know, one of the best sorts of cooking fats you can have. So, you know, rendering your bear fat and then actually cooking the bear meat in the rendered bear fat is delicious. Great way to do it in the field too. If you're in the backcountry and you shoot a bear, you could render some of the bear fat right on the spot, drop cubes of meat in the boiling bear fat, and you've got a pretty cool little backcountry meal.
These cuts don't look like they have any fat on them.
Yeah, they don't have a tremendous amount of fat. Bears, like most animals, carry their fat, just like me too, across your back, next to the spine, and on the hindquarters. You asked earlier about the time of year. This is a spring bear, and it doesn't have the big, thick, snowy white layers of fat build up on its haunches quite yet. You can see that some of this silver skin is sort of stubborn to get off. This bear was just shot last night. It hasn't had time to really set up. One thing that helps to get the silver skin off, if you can, is to refrigerate the meat for a while or even partially freeze it, stiffen everything up, and then you can sort of slice this silver skin off more easily. When the meat is so pliable, it sort of wants to come up with the silver skin.
I'm just cutting off the connective tissue off our meat here. When you're cutting off the connective tissue, try not to get too much meat on there. Try and get some of this right here off.
Just lay it flat on the table. Yeah, that'll work too, maybe. And this one, this is going to be hard to get off. When it's like that on the end where you can't really get it, just lay it flat on the table and then work it off that way. Meat close to that is not any good anyway, so...
So just cut. Oh, that's tough, yeah.
Yeah, feel how tough that is, like rubber there, so...
That is like rubber, that's awful.
Okay, now, just go ahead and cut
Yeah.
that up into pieces that we can put in the grinder.
Just anyway.
That's fine. Here, this is for, if this was going to be a steak, I would be more particular, but since this is going to be ground meat...
Okay, now how should I like cube it or?
What I would do, it's up to you, but what I would do is first cut the whole thing this way,
That's what I was
and then
gonna
cut it into pieces that way. You might want to use this knife, or you can use that. Either one will work.
I'm just gonna make a little incision with this one. Cut like this. Very simple.
What's going on out here?
Well, last night I shot a bear, and today our new meat grinder arrived in the mail. And I'm grinding up some meat for some bear tacos. Thought we'd give it a try.
Just gonna let it run like that.
I made short work of that. I'm guessing there's, I don't know, at least maybe 7, perhaps 8 pounds of ground bear meat there. A lot of tacos, a lot of lasagna. Hey, I got work for Belle first. Hold on to it tight because it's going to get heavy. The opening is there, you go. Okay, just sit that up. Talk.
No, Ma and Pa.
Put them in the bags. Alright, that's good, kiddo. I can do the rest. Thank you. Make sure you wash your hands.
Well, the mighty hunter returned last night with a bear. So we are processing and getting everything put into bags for the freezer. But we thought we'd have some ground bear tacos for dinner. If you drop a few onions, who's to know? Just throw them back in.
We've got about 8 pounds of freshly ground bear burger.
That looks really good. Look at that, baby. Okay, Leela's going in.
I like it. Oh wow, I'm still preparing my taco.
She gives it, oh, she gives it 10 fingers and 2 soft feet.
Knowing and understanding the sources of our food was taken for granted until just a few decades ago when food started to come on styrofoam boats wrapped in cellophane. Even 50 or 75 years ago, many people lived on farms. They didn't live on a farm, they had family or friends who lived on farms, and they saw the process of slaughtering animals, of butchering and raising animals too. Today, that's not necessarily true. Kids don't get to see that process. And so it's important to introduce them to the sources of their food. If you're a hunter, through sort of field to table, making sure they see the process from beginning to end. If you're not a hunter, you can take your kids to a local butcher shop. You can take them to the local farmer's market. There are many ways in which you can begin to talk about food sources and how kids can get introduced and reconnected to nature and their food. And so we think it's really important with our kids to make sure they understand where their food comes from and learn about life and death. And so we try to involve them in the hunting process from field to table so that they understand that in order for life to go on, not just with humans, but in the natural ecosystem, usually something must die. It's a transfer of energy from one being to the next. It's been going on since there was life on this planet. And so it's important for everyone to understand that process, especially kids. And so we like to involve our kids, and when I teach, I like to teach this concept to other kids. It's important to go slow and read the cues from your kid when introducing them to hunting and the sources of their food. You know, kids they tend to be ready for that sort of information at different times in their life, at different ages, and just sort of, read their reaction. If they get upset, back off. There's no reason to push it. wait a few weeks or a few months even until you come back to the topic. I mean, some kids just don't like the sight of blood, for example, and you know, we're sort of hardwired to be alarmed at that. So it's always good to go slow and to read the room, so to speak, and make sure your child is ready for it, or children, you know, if you are a mentor or a teacher, to make sure that the kids you're working with are ready for it. If they're not, you know, we could have the opposite effect of what we're trying to do, and we can scare kids if we start them too early or if we don't pay attention to their reactions. So it's a good idea to go slow, pay attention to what the kids are saying, thinking, their facial expressions, and introduce them with ease. So we hope this video will give you an entree to exposing your own children to the sources of their food and how it goes from living animal to something to eat on their plate at the end of the day. Thanks for joining in, and please click subscribe.